Yo.
Yo.
Okay, Benji, I know you have a story because tomorrow's election day, and I wanted to talk about the election and the media strategies of both campaigns.
Yes.
But you have a story that you've told me from 2016 that I think speaks to how we got to this point. And so if you don't mind, I'd love to hear that right now.
Well, okay, so let's go all the way back to 2016, and Trump was running against Hillary Clinton. Everybody thought Hillary Clinton had it. And by the way, this is not a I'm on this side or that side of politics. This is just simply observing as somebody that loves YouTube, social media, and saw something back then. Trump wins the election. And it was late at night. I'm like, oh my Lord. I know one of the reasons why he won, and nobody's talking about it. I call Sean, co-founder of Video Influencers, co-author, wrote the book with me, YouTube Secrets. And I said, Sean, Trump won partly because of his influence on Twitter. Now, it was not new to people that he was using Twitter to spread his message and to basically gain more influence. I just think it was a bigger factor than people were reporting on after he won the election, because it's obviously a very huge surprise. Some people would say even he was surprised, but me being somebody that uses YouTube and social media, and at that time he was most influential on Twitter, I thought this is something that's the beginning of something new that people aren't realizing, because most of the traditional media, most of the people that are used to the way politics were for basically 100 years, weren't as savvy or sensitive to the reality that was brewing on Twitter and just social media in general. And so my thought was the playing field had changed and nobody realized it.
I want to give you my take from that time period as well, right? Because we were working together, and I remember something that happened previous to that, actually, that tipped my mind in the direction of the shift from traditional media to social media being a major factor.
The way I could have thought about it, so if I thought about this as a Trump complete 2020 style phenomenon, then I'm going Trump landslide blowout, right? I just can't accept that Roe did not fundamentally change the election.
Bill Simmons was a relatively early adopter of the format, launching the BS Report in 2007. A year later, he managed to land a shockingly high-profile guest, presidential candidate Barack Obama. Sadly, the podcast never happened.
My theory of the world that would lead to this map is effectively that the combination of January 6th, and in particular, the overturning of Roe versus Wade, has represented a political earthquake in American politics, that pollsters have consistently failed to capture this newly shifted electorate. And in doing so, they have fundamentally missed a significant shift among women. On top of that, Kamala Harris is a fairly ideal candidate to champion this new pro-choice, anti-chaos majority. She has built her campaign around appealing to this heavily female coalition. And Donald Trump, on the other side, has leaned into some of his most toxic traits here down the home stretch, and is in some ways an ideal foil to motivate this coalition, especially since he is the individual who is responsible for putting the justices on the court to overturn Roe versus Wade.
We were at VidCon, and I remember being up, they separate the layers of VidCon into like industry track, they've got the creator track, and then the fan track, the community, right? So industry up top, right? We sat in that giant room, and I'm pretty sure it was Susan Wojcicki up there giving the speech, and they showed this giant graph that showed the ad dollar spend on YouTube versus on traditional TV. And then they showed the watch time on YouTube versus traditional TV. And one graph was like, traditional TV has all this money, right? But then has this few views. And YouTube has all these views and this little money. And she's like, we are at the beginning of the shift from traditional media to social media. And this is gonna change everything, right? And so I have to ask you, before we get into the depths of short form versus long form and all the crazy discussion that we are going to have about what this election strategy looks like, is there any place for traditional media anymore in a campaign?
Well, 100%, because traditional media still is one of the most experienced places for reporting news.
Yes.
They're just the fastest, and they've got the most resources, and that's what people jump to. So, for example, if there's a disaster or there's some war that's breaking out, you just go to the news. It's just habit for everybody. I can't speak for younger people, but anybody that grew up in that area, it's just easier to go to CNN and get the news. Regardless of your perception of whether they're, unbiased or not, or are objective, they can do it. And they do it really well. So that includes politics too, because those resources they use for covering disasters or war or whatever the breaking news is, they use it for politics. Okay, you can't deny it. There is a place, but it's the opposite of what you said in that graph, meaning they're just not as influential on people's decision making. They are still a place to get information,
yes,
but they're not really determining what the message is and what message people receive on the other end, because at the end of the day, I don't have it right here, people's heads are inside of this.
Yeah.
People's faces are dug into their screen.
Yes.
And their fingers are literally like,
yes,
rather than on the remote control kind of doing it. So in an immediate news needed situation, traditional media, they got you, right? Debates, they happen on traditional media. But literally everything else in life, which can be now probably 98%, happens on a different platform, on social media, or a place like YouTube. And that's the biggest difference. So to really shorten this question, they still have a place, but it's not as significant.
And it's shrinking more than ever.
Definitely shrinking.
All right. I want to give you my story of the last year of how I viewed this election cycle through the lens of media, in particular social media and creators. And it ties so much in with what we've talked about on this channel in terms of short form and long form. And to start, I think the best way to talk about it is what you talked about with Twitter. Now, I have always said TikTok is the video form of what Twitter was in its best days. I mean, think about what TikTok started out as, really. The concept of short form video didn't start out on TikTok. It didn't even start out as Musical.ly. It started out as Vine. And Vine, was probably the purest expression of it, 6-second videos. I mean, even TikTok, at its beginning, let you do 60-second videos, 10x the length there. But 6-second videos on Vine had a huge cultural relevance for a long time, at least while I was kind of going through high school and stuff like that. And guess who bought them? Twitter. Of course, there was this alignment between the two of them. Now, of course, Twitter being run by, I would argue, sort of like a crazy group at the time, sort of squandered their ability to really capitalize on it, and then Musical.ly comes along, and then it becomes TikTok, and we know that entire story. But the mechanics of short form video are a lot like the mechanics of short form written content, in that people watch for a very little amount of time, they tend to not remember a lot of things. It's about the instant gratification, the reaction is fast, the response is fast, and
they're on it for a very long time.
And people are on it for a really long time because you can just scroll. Okay. So at the beginning of this year, people were talking about this election being the TikTok election. In fact, there was legislation at the beginning of the year, right, to ban TikTok because we were afraid that China was going to influence the election through TikTok. That's how much people thought this was going to be the TikTok election. Over the course of the summer, I think we saw some of that, right? Biden drops out, people go crazy. Kamala joins, and there's like that Kamala HQ account that's run by her campaign on there that goes viral relatively regularly. Like, she's doing pretty well on TikTok, I would say. But as the summer kind of marched along, this sort of excitement around that, there were some trends related to it. There was a little bit of excitement. I felt like it sort of started to fizzle a little bit. And as we got closer to the election, what was on the uprise? Long form content, podcasts, and YouTube. Now, I have a theory for why I think this is happening, and I have a theory about which strategy is better, but also why they have both chosen the right strategy for their campaign. But I'm curious, given your perspective, because I know we've talked a lot about politics and who we think is doing the best in terms of the campaign and what we think the strategies are. I want to hear about your perspective on the politics of it, and then let's work backwards to the strategy.
Okay, got it. Yeah. So you want to know the politics of the candidates and how they've chosen the platforms and the strategies they're utilizing. Okay, cool. And again, I love to talk about politics, but by no means is this to help either one of the candidates. But I say that because it's important for me to be objective when I'm doing research.
Yes.
For content strategy, research, and understanding.
I think one thing about this video in particular, right, is that these are some of the biggest heavyweights when it comes to media.
Yep.
One of the most important media outcomes that you can be looking for. And I think there's a lot for creators to learn from people who are looking to use media for a particular outcome. Not everybody wants to be Mr. Beast, which is like a pure media play. I'm going to be the biggest on the platform. I'm going to win no matter what. Not everybody wants to be the New York Times.
And neither is Harris is not Mr. Beast and Trump is not Mr. Beast.
They're not, but that's because they don't want to be. They want to be something else, and their strategies reflect that. So it's not about the politics; it's about the strategy.
Okay, cool. But let's break it down.
Yeah.
Okay. Let's talk about Harris first.
Okay.
Kamala Harris is obviously a minority female, and her policy or the policy she's representing is supporting freedom of choice with women. That'd be one of the big ones, and then also going after the younger voters. Again, probably more female, right? Like it just, I mean, she'll be the first female president. You cannot deny that is going to be significant for a lot of females. Not all of them, but for a lot of females.
Agreed.
And then third, she will be the different candidate. A lot of people probably don't think this because she's a continuation of Biden, but she's different because she's different from the two men that were going after each other initially, and now she's this younger, even though respectively, I think she's like 60 or something like that.
I actually don't even know.
I don't even know, but like maybe even younger than that. She's still younger than Trump.
So what you're saying is, okay, so her demographic.
A new vision, right?
Younger, more female, and things like that.
Future-oriented.
And the polls bear that out, right?
Yeah,
Which
totally.
leaves Trump on the other side, right?
Okay, yeah, but let's just continue Kamala and her choice of platform and her strategy on that. Why is she going on TikTok and short form? Because that's where that demographic is, that younger voter that she's trying to reach.
Yeah.
Also, somebody on her team probably is saying, hey, these are the things we should do. Very much probably paying attention to the algorithm. I can't speak to the type of content she's doing, but definitely nothing like what Trump's doing. It's very much catered to people that's on that platform that want it in that vertical short form video. That is her strategy right now in respect to this conversation. Okay. Now we go to Trump. This is what's kind of crazy about Trump. He's the nostalgia guy, not only because of his age, but because he was president during an era that's before this Biden administration. So he's hey, we want to go back to the good old days prior to 2020, okay, before this administration was on it. He's all about the economy. And also, guess what? He's going after the male voters. If you look, and the reason you know this is for a fact is because one of the policy battles going on is Roe versus Wade, okay? Women's right to choose, right? Whether that should be a national law of the land or that should be left up to the states. It all has to do with abortion rights, basically, okay? And to choose or pro-life. So Trump can't win that battle because he was the guy that put in the justices that overturn Roe versus Wade. Again, there's no judgment on my part or Austin's here. That's just the way it is. So he can't even entertain or
strategically
fake, right?
That becomes a roadblock for him.
I mean, just to give him credit though, him and Vance have said, it's not even us deciding. We just want to leave it up to the states. Now, how you determine how extreme that is or not, the point I'm trying to make is his latest campaign ad that just came out within the last day or two, it was 100%, maybe 99% focused on targeting males. Almost everybody in it was males. I think we counted like one female in the whole ad.
Really?
Yeah, versus Kamala's last ad was very diverse, okay? So their strategy, they're even showing it in their last video, targeting males of a certain demographic, right? Specific ages. So the other thing about Trump, this has nothing to do with the policy, but it's actually his background in media. he can just do interviews. And he's proving he can do really long interviews. So what is the platform of choice? We were talking about Twitter, and he has Truth Social, but really it's YouTube. They chose long form content on YouTube to be the place. The reason this is not even speculation is because one of the biggest interviews that happened during this whole campaign was on Joe Rogan. And I just looked. I think it's up to 42 million views.
That's crazy.
And it's a 3-hour conversation.
Yeah.
So you've got Kamala going for the younger voters, maybe the female supporters. She's choosing short form on TikTok, right? Of course, she's on all platforms, but that's like the big one. And then Trump's on the other side, really going for the male voters. He's like the nostalgia guy. His policies are more around the economy, and then also just like America first, make America great again. Choosing long form in YouTube. So really, in regards to creators and what creators should care about, it's really short form against long form. It's TikTok against YouTube. And what's ironic about this whole conversation, we started off with how traditional media has a place for certain things, but not as significant. But honestly, does that even really matter? Because everyone is either on TikTok or YouTube or both, because they're on their phones all day. They're barely watching it. I think where traditional media probably will win in terms of their influence is like covering the actual election the day of. But everything else, today, all the days before this, for last year, it has all been social media, and it boils down to Kamala, short form, TikTok, Trump, long form, YouTube.
Okay, let me read you something, or like talk about something that I think is relevant here, that you and I have discussed a lot when it comes to this. Because, we're using politics here as a tool for us to investigate this difference between short form and long form and how it's being used, right? But we've talked about this totally independent of these things for any creator out there, right? There's no shame in short form. There are certain trade-offs that you make doing short form, but you get huge amounts of views, huge amounts of impression, and in some cases, quite a bit of reach and influence with that, right? Long form, there's trade-offs as well. Sometimes harder to get as many views, usually slower growth, but usually you have more of a connection with your audience, and you can kind of capitalize on things like AdSense and having more amount of time. Now, the candidates probably aren't thinking about AdSense. That's not really what they care about, right? They're more thinking about what the view looks like, right? And so the thing that I read the other day was talking about how not all impressions are created equal, right? I think impressions is more of like a Facebook term, right? Where they talk about, okay, how many people have actually seen this thing? YouTube, the equivalent is like what the reach is, right? Or like, I think they also talk about impressions like showing you the thumbnail and things like that. On YouTube, I would argue the equivalent is not all views are created equal. And that goes especially during this new platform split between shorts and traditional videos, right? A short view is not necessarily going to have the same impact as a long form video and its view, right?
Yeah,
that said,
you should break it down.
Yeah, go for it.
Well, to explain for people that maybe aren't savvy to this or do this for a living, shorts, right? We're talking about shorts or shorter videos. Shorts is max right now, well, I think it's up to 3 minutes, but traditionally forever it was only 60 seconds.
Exactly.
So of that 60 seconds, most people are probably only watching 20 to 30 seconds, and that's it. So one view equals 20 seconds versus the extreme other side. So set aside the 3-hour conversation Trump had with Joe Rogan, just a 45 to 60 minute conversation or interview on YouTube, definitely getting way more than 20 seconds, probably more than 60 seconds. So that's what we're saying. In a 30-minute conversation, Trump and somebody interviewing him, you might be watching anywhere from 5 minutes, 10 minutes, maybe 15 minutes if you really care, maybe the whole 30 minutes versus, and that's just counted as one view versus on the short, counted as one view, but it could only be 20 seconds long.
Exactly.
So the amount, that's what we're trying to distinguish here. The impact that long form is making on the viewer is greater, or has the ability to be greater, than the impact one view on a shorts makes. So same thing with TikTok and long form YouTube, by the way.
Okay, let me show you really quick. I am going to read this quote here. This is from an article that I was reading the other day. This guy named, I think, Gahan said, a lot of people are calling this the TikTok election. I think that's a nice headline, but it's not generally where meaningful change takes place. TikTok is a great awareness driver, an audience development tool. But to drive action, long-form content moves the needle. And I think that that's something you and I have talked about a ton, right? That with short form, it's great because you reach a large audience. And I think that the thing that TikTok being an awareness driver is a big insight for me, in the sense that the thing where powerful change happens or action happens on TikTok is almost always encompassed in trends. Those kind of viral ideas that catch on quickly, are easy to do, and don't require a lot of action, but require you to be tuned in to understand. There's like a lot of news that like Gen Z views TikTok as an important news source, or where they get most of their news. That's all about awareness. It's not about action. On the flip side, long form content, you are immersed for 10 minutes, 100 minutes, 3 hours, in the case of the Joe Rogan Trump podcast, right? With this one person's thoughts that's mostly totally unfiltered, at least compared to a traditional media audience, right? And so as soon as you start sitting with someone, the thing you and I have talked about for the last year is the idea of the mere exposure effect. The more time you spend with something, or the more time you spend with someone, the more likely you are to listen to them, to care about them, and to understand them, and to be influenced by them. And so going long form is more likely to drive action. And to your point about the male voters versus the female voters, I would actually argue, you had mentioned that Kamala was sort of young, that she was aiming for young voters. I would argue that Trump is also going for young voters in this election in some ways, right? Both TikTok and the podcast ecosystem skew younger, which makes sense. It's the newer form of media, right? The difference, though, is that, unfortunately for Trump, younger male voters are lower propensity. They're less likely to get out and vote than are the female voters, actually, which is an interesting dynamic. And so guess what? Trump, in my opinion, has to go for the long-form, action-driving version of the podcast, which is, by the way, more durable, longer lasting, a longer play.
Agreed.
Than Kamala would have to. Kamala, using short form and using TikTok, would be kind of more interested in just raising awareness. Oh, did you know Trump did this to you? Or did you know that this is happening?
Or literally just doing something fun, like a dance or something like that.
Exactly.
And just being in front of people on TikTok and Shorts.
Like you said, even if it is an identity vote, which again, no shame in that. For a woman, wanting to have a woman in office, right? Just saying, I'm running for president, like that might be enough for some people, right? That's just an awareness piece.
Can I give a real world example
Please.
Of this? Okay. So say you're taking a road trip with somebody, okay? What do we do on road trips? We literally talk for a long time. Let's call this an hour-long road trip. It's commuting into downtown from where we live, okay? So it takes an hour. We talk a lot. We can talk about a lot of different things. And arguably, that conversation will have more impact in that day and maybe for a long period of time after that. Versus during that trip, we go to a toll booth. And we talk to the guy that's running the toll booth, and he says something to us, right? Outside of his job. He just says something random, okay? How much of an impact will it have made? It could be the wildest, craziest thing, but it's like here.
Or even the most profound or most insightful, or could change your life.
Right.
But he said it for 10 seconds.
Yeah. And then this is the other thing. What if you had to go through like 10 different toll booths, okay? Which happens in Florida when you drive around. There's like multiple toll booths. How likely are you going to remember any one of those, maybe one of those, versus that person that's riding in the car with you for an hour?
Exactly.
The reason I say that is everything you just said, you can encompass in that kind of a journey.
Yes.
And then how it relates to politics and swaying somebody's decision making. Mm-hmm. So the mere exposure effect would be more powerful with the person inside the car with you.
Yes.
Especially if that was happening a lot, which to Trump's strength is happening because he's doing tons of podcasts, tons of interviews on YouTube, and it's like he's hanging out with all the viewers and the people, discovering them on there a lot.
Yes.
Versus on short form, it's just so many hits, but it's not really making the same type of impact.
Yes.
But there is something to consider, okay? Where is the people they're trying to target, and how do they make a decision? I don't even know if this is true. I'm going to make a bold kind of guess.
I love it.
I believe, generally speaking, there's more females on short form and can make a decision based off of what they observe on short form versus males tend to just sit and listen to podcasts, hence why Trump is on these podcasts and interviews, and will make a decision based off of that. Okay, so it's not even saying is short form better than long form, because in my example, kind of seems like, oh, long form is actually better because you're having a long conversation.
Yeah.
But if you're okay with getting the one hit, but that one hit times 100, because that's the other thing about short form or like shorts or TikTok, you're watching a lot. So the mere exposure effect still comes into play if Kamala's hitting you with different, clips all the time versus Trump might be just 1 hour. I say this all the time to support long form because hey, you're going to be able to convince somebody or make an impact because it's an hour long thing.
We're fans of long form.
I'm listening to it while I'm washing dishes. I'm not on TikTok, but I can't deny that any viewer, but I'm talking about females because that's who Kamala is trying to reach out to, may be impacted because they see her and she's talking about the right things. Because the responsibility of a campaign manager is to get their candidate to the right place to say the right thing to the right people in the right way. Arguably, they're both doing it in their own ways. So that is something that I think people aren't seeing because they're stuck in their own world. Me, I'm definitely I'll say for sure I'm on YouTube, long form, not on TikTok. Versus Judy, my wife, actually, she isn't on TikTok, but she loves Instagram Reels. She's not listening to long form podcasts, especially about politics. So guess what? If Kamala is trying to reach someone like my wife, I'm not saying she's voting one way or the other, but if she was trying to reach someone like my wife, she's in the right place. So we say TikTok, but that translates to YouTube Shorts and Instagram Reels.
To add to your analogy there, right? What if it wasn't a toll booth, right? What if it's like you're on a long road trip and you're stopping for food, right? And you go to Waffle House for the first time. You're in the South. You go to Waffle House for the first time. You kind of go in there, and actually Waffle House isn't a good example because there's no windows. You go to Chick-fil-A or something like that for the first time, and you have a quick interaction with the worker there. They're very friendly. They're almost like exceedingly friendly and things like that. And you probably don't remember everything that they said, but you kind of remember the vibe of that. But you're like, that chicken was pretty good, and the interaction that I had was great. I'm going to go to them again. And then you kind of like go to that. And the next time, the important thing for that one, for that short interaction, is that it's sort of like consistent, first of all, and that you've done it multiple times. I mean, you can't deny, short form has the potential for way higher reach than any long form will. Now, something like the Joe Rogan experience interview with Trump might begin to push those boundaries a little bit. But generally speaking, the average short form piece of content is going to have a bigger reach than the average piece of long form content, would be my guess.
It has a higher potential to reach more people faster.
Just because you're watching more, frankly, right? If that's the case, right, it's exactly what you said. If Trump is trying to reach voters who maybe need just a little more of a push, building that relationship over that long form, over that long road trip, is much more likely to get someone who wasn't going to vote before out to vote. Now, if Kamala is just trying to reach more people and make them aware that the election's coming up, aware that she's running, aware of her position on Roe, for example, to your point, well, why wouldn't you go to short form? So in some ways, I came in today wanting to know who you thought maybe had the better media campaign there. I guess where I'm landing personally is that maybe it makes sense why they both landed where they wanted to go. And that really maybe there's not a winner one way or the other. But I'm curious, in terms of a takeaway, do you have a perspective on who you think is winning the online media battle?
Yeah, I don't even question right now is Trump. And he's dominating not only with long form, but his ability to just be everywhere. He's a machine. He's just kind of crazy. He does a 3-hour conversation with Joe Rogan, gets on a plane and goes to a rally and then does all that. You don't see the same amount of airtime being put out there by Kamala Harris. So in terms of course, I'm very biased in terms of YouTube and long-form content. So I say this. I say all that with a little hesitation because I'm not on TikTok.
That's
and
fair.
I'm not paying attention to short-form content. That's why I'm fascinated by this conversation, because I'm not saying you're on TikTok more, but
I'm definitely on short form more than you are.
Yeah, and we're just observing from different perspectives. And I'd say, I mean, to be very objective, he's just had a lot more experience doing interviews. We're talking since the 80s, right? He is doing way more conversations because he's had way more conversations. And then 3, the one thing you can't deny about him and his history, people can argue whether he was a successful businessman or not. No one can argue if he's a marketing genius. Yeah. He is. That was what he was known for, marketing his name, putting it on buildings, the casinos, and all kinds of products. Johnny Harris does this whole deep dive into Trump's background, and it was as if everything he did was positioning himself to be able to market himself as a presidential candidate. So he's got that leverage over Kamala Harris. Kamala Harris, though, I believe, this is where I'm not exposed as much. She's just younger. She can connect with a younger viewer, especially a younger female viewer on those other platforms. And what you and I both know, there's research been done. Females tend to be more likely to vote and to be swayed to vote. And males, not as much, right? It maybe takes more work to get them. I don't know. And I'm
Hence
actually
the long form strategy.
I'm talking about the younger crowd,
yes,
right? I don't think the younger crowd will be the make or break. But the real question is, who do I think is going to win?
Do you want to give me a prediction?
So a week ago, I would have said Trump is going to win because of the depth that he's going with this long-form content and the conversations he's having. And I mean, you're taking 42 million views. I know Joe Rogan has a specific demographic and a specific audience, but I believe that 42 million is going beyond just his audience.
I would agree.
People are just curious. That's what, me, as a citizen of this country, I'm curious what the candidates are going to do.
100%.
That's your job as somebody, and I'm not saying you have to be this way, but I want to know, what's your policies?
Yeah.
How are you going to run this country?
What kind of person are you?
Yeah. So in 3 hours, you can get a lot more typically than you can just a soundbite on a traditional news media interview or whatever. So I thought that until literally today. I was thinking, the way no one saw Trump coming in 2016 on Twitter, we might not see Kamala on TikTok in short form for the female vote. The Roe versus Wade issue has been proven already to be a major issue in 2022. And of course, they're leaning on that as the Harris campaign.
Of course.
And Trump defends his position, says he's trying to make it for the states to decide, right? But that TikTok could be the Twitter of 2024 for Kamala. And this is where now, if I always say, hey, if you had to bet money, who's going to win? A week ago, I said Trump. Right now, I'm a little hesitant to make a decision. I actually think it's definitely going to be close.
I think it's interesting that you bring that up, because where I go with that is that Roe is more of an awareness issue in some ways. That if you are made aware of this situation with Roe as like a woman, you might be more likely to show up or more likely to tell your friend. Whereas, like you said, with Trump, with a younger male, you might need to convince them more to vote, even if they were more likely to. So it makes 100% sense. If that's the case, I will feel very vindicated calling TikTok the modern version of Twitter. I think that Twitter, it's still got its place, but I think that TikTok is the modern version.
And I would include YouTube Shorts and Instagram Reels into that vote, by the way.
Short form as a whole, I agree 100%. I want to give you my takeaway for creators, and then I want to hear yours before we close out. My takeaway for creators is this. I'm hesitant to say which strategy. I'm hesitant to call it the podcast election. I'm hesitant to call it the TikTok election. What it is the social media election for the very first time, and especially the video, this online social video election. Why is that? Well, we've seen a decline in cable TV, right? We've seen this increase in online media. And like you said, people are on their phones constantly now. The strategy that you take as a creator when you are trying to reach a particular audience or trying to get across a particular message or trying to make a particular action will depend on what your end goal is, right? If you're trying to sell a product, maybe long form makes more sense because, awareness of your product is the start. But if you're trying to build a relationship with a customer over a longer period of time, well, long form is the way to do that most likely, right? If you're trying to start a trend and maybe get brand awareness, well, short form is probably the way to go. And so the decision that you make between short form and long form is not which version of that format is going to win. It's more, what is the outcome that you want to do and which version of that format makes the most sense. I'll leave with one more thing before I hear your thoughts. The most profound thing that you mentioned in our last video was that the classic creator, the one who's making a video between 5 minutes and 10 minutes, is dying. And the reason that it's dying, it's not going to go away altogether, but the reason that they are having so much trouble in that missing middle is that they're competing with the long form and they're competing with the short form. They're competing on both fronts. And I think that it is telling that neither candidate is catering to that classic viewer. They're catering to the short form or they're catering to the long form.
They made a decision.
They made a decision. All right, closing thoughts.
Yeah, my closing thoughts about this for creators or people that want to create content on platforms and what is the takeaway. People running these campaigns aren't necessarily dummies. They probably get paid a lot of money for a reason on both sides of the aisle here. And what I would say is this whole discussion kind of breaks down why we think one campaign is using this platform and how their policies and the people they're targeting is influencing that. And then, the difference between long form and its ability to influence versus short form and its ability to build awareness. The lesson for me is watching these two, you're seeing somebody be very masterful because this is what they've done for a very long time. And they're kind of just sitting back, working really hard and doing it at the highest level through long form, and that being Trump. And so for you, if you're somebody that can have long conversations, and I call it nerd out or be obsessed with the topic, long form is the way to go because it's the easiest way to create content without the need for production and editing and whatnot. And this is why we see the success of podcasts. And that's my takeaway for the Trump administration, how they're using these podcast interviews and ultimately long form to connect with people and potentially convince them to vote for him. What you can take away from Harris is having the awareness that maybe, because the big question was, why isn't she doing interviews?
Yeah. She's done a couple, but not nearly as many as Trump.
I don't want to get into the speculation, the conspiracy theories, whatever, but there might actually be a really simple reason. Because they know exactly who they're targeting. And they might not actually need to do the long-form content. It could be that simple. It might not actually be nefarious or suspicious or lack of abilities. And so they're just going all in with that short form because they are targeting who they're targeting, which in her case could just be isolated to the thing that maybe will help her win the presidential election, which is females that are okay with just watching a TikTok, enough of TikToks, not just building awareness, but like putting it all together and be like, hey, I'm making the decision because that's where they're at. The biggest takeaway, if you want to reach anybody in social media, is go to where they're at the most. And that's what both campaigns are doing. And you, as somebody that wants to get views, build influence, start a business, sell a product, and ultimately do whatever you want to do in your profession or business, you have to understand the strategy is the same for you as these presidential candidates. Think about who it is that you want to connect with. What device or other device are they on the most? What platform or app they're using the most in the day if you want to get the most ROI, rather than just spreading yourself thin all over the place, which actually neither candidate is kind of doing. They're actually really being strategic. You're being smart about where you're going because we have a limited amount of time and you want to go to where the most ROI is. And it might not just be YouTube. That's the thing. As I am so sold on YouTube because I wrote YouTube Secrets with Sean, and also I see the growth of YouTube. At the same time, I'm looking at TikTok over here. Look, YouTube Shorts now. Like, wow, that is not going away. Like you said, the classic viewer, it used to be, 3-4 minutes to 10-minute classic YouTube videos are just shrinking, and kind of going away as you're choosing one or the other. I don't think it's going to be the long form beating the short form. I just think they have different places for different people, and that's the point. Who are the people you're trying to reach? What platforms are they on? And that's where you should be creating content for them the way they want it.
All right, Benji. We'll have to check in after the election.
I know, this is going to be crazy. This is going to be crazy, 24, 48 hours.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Yep.